Today, I've got a new episode of 4K Takeaways for you guys, where I'll be offering my take on recent 4K releases of The Hitcher, The Ring, Maxxxine, and A Nightmare on Elm Street. So let's rock this. Hi everyone, how you doing? Welcome back. I'm Fuzz, and today I've got another installment of 4K Takeaways for you. You can think of this as kind of a horror/thriller edition. Now, for those of you who are new to the channel, this is a series where I offer my version of a 4K review, my take on or impression of recent 4K releases that have caught my attention. Usually of older catalog movies, but occasionally I will throw a newer film in the mix as well, like I'm doing today with Maxxxine. Especially if that newer film in question is like a throwback or like a retro, like throwback type film, or otherwise kind of harkens back to the spirit of the old school filmmaking style of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So today I'm going to be offering my take on recent 4K releases of The Hitcher from Second Sight, as well as Maxxxine, a Lionsgate release, The Ring, new Paramount 4K, and then a big one, of course, A Nightmare on Elm Street, recent 4K release. Now, before I get into these 4K reviews, we do have a new Fuzz Club member I want to give a quick shout out to. Paul Spearman just became the latest member of the Fuzz Club. Paul, thank you so much for your extra support of the channel. I really appreciate that. I've enjoyed reading your comments and chatting with you, and I definitely look forward to more of that moving forward. But I'm just super grateful for your support, so thank you so much. And if any of you would like to know more about the Fuzz Club, there is a link in the description below. You just click on that and it'll bring up all the membership information for you. Okay, so without any further ado, let's get right into these bad boys here. And first off, we got to talk about the big one. Got to talk about The Hitcher from Second Sight Films. This is, of course, their nice limited edition chunky box, and I'll show you more of that here in a few minutes when I get into talking about the packaging. But this is a great film. This was a first-time watch for me. I had never seen the film ever, if you can believe that, which I feel weird saying that because I feel like this is kind of a classic. But yeah, I just never got around to watching this. I remember it playing on cable TV quite a bit in the 80s. I remember it being on HBO, I think it was. And well, it's an HBO film, so yeah, I guess it would have been on HBO. But I feel like it was always playing. I always seem to remember it being on TV quite a bit. And I think I might have even, flipped over to it a couple times and watched a scene or a couple scenes from it. I didn't remember anything about it. If I did watch a couple scenes, I certainly didn't remember those scenes. But I do remember this movie being fairly prominent back in the late 80s, and just never got around to checking it out. So this was my first time view, and I gotta say, I absolutely love this film. I can't wait to go back and watch it again and see what more I get out of it the next time I watch it. Because I could see this being the type of film where you actually get more out of it with each viewing, right? There's lots to kind of sink your teeth into there. There's some interesting kind of like subtext, and I think you could even say like social commentary, underlying social commentary. There's actually quite a bit here to sink your teeth into. And so yeah, I just really enjoyed this film. It's kind of a, there's a lot to think about with this film, more than you would think, because it really is a fairly minimal film, a minimalist type film. But it's got some substance to it, surprisingly so. So yeah, just a great film that I had a lot of fun with, and really glad I picked this up. And I knew I was going to like it. I mean, I knew I would, but I was not disappointed at all in the film itself, right? Or this release, really in any way. A great release and a great film. Now, this was directed by Robert Harmon, and it stars, of course, Rutger Hauer and C. Thomas Howell and Jennifer Jason Leigh, which I didn't realize when I got it. I mean, I didn't really look at the credits to see who all was in it. I knew Rutger was in it, and I knew C. Thomas Howell was in it, but I didn't realize Jennifer Jason Leigh was in it until I actually started watching it. And, you know, I've always liked her. I think she does a good job with the stuff that she's done. And it was a good role for her in this. You know, she was, of course, quite young when this was made, as was C. Thomas Howell. I believe he was only like 17 years old when he made this film. So, but yeah, just really had a lot of fun with this one. Okay, so let's talk about the image presentation and the audio. This was sourced, the 4K was sourced from a 4K scan of the original 35 millimeter camera negative. It was, the restoration was director supervised and approved, meaning Robert Harmon was there working with Second Sight on this. It includes Dolby Vision and HDR10, and the 4K disc is on a triple layer BD100 disc, and it also comes with a region-free Blu-ray disc in addition to that. The aspect ratio is 2.39 to 1, and then for audio you get both a Dolby Atmos mix, and then you also get the original 2.0 stereo track as well. Now this thing looked fantastic, really an amazing looking image. I just had a blast watching it. It was so much fun. Now even though I've never seen this before, and I can't really comment on how this looks relative to previous home media releases, just based on what I did see from this, I have to assume that this is probably pretty faithful to the source. Now I don't know if they did anything different with the colors or the color grading or something that's like maybe different from the original, but just based on what I saw, this looked like it was something that was fairly faithful to the source materials, right? Meaning they didn't do a bunch of digital manipulation or, you know, scrub the grain, as we sometimes say. The grain is intact, and I mean, they might have done some grain management just to give it some consistency, and that's fine. You know, they didn't screw with this in some way that really made it like revisionist or anything like that. This looks like it was fairly faithful to the source. The details in this are amazing, whether it's people's skin and complexion or hairs or the clothing they're wearing. You can see like fibers on the clothing. The landscapes look incredible. Just a nice crisp image and just a gorgeous looking image in terms of like depth and pop to it, right? The colors look amazing, even though, yeah, it's got a pretty, you know, it doesn't have this like wide range of colors, right? Like this kind of is more or less the color scheme of the film, right? But the colors, they absolutely pop. Take, for example, the gas station scene, the gas station explosion. That just looked ridiculously good in 4K. The fire, the explosion, like, holy crap, did it look good. The overall aesthetic of the film is something that I think just really lends itself well to 4K, and you know, the locations, the landscapes, like when you're looking at like the desert, the Texas desert, isn't that where it is? Texas, I believe. I mean, it really looks stunning. The image overall just has this nice vibrancy to it and this nice presence to it that you would expect with a 4K release, right? I mean, that's one of the benefits of 4K, is that you have increased depth and presence to the image, and that is certainly the case here with the Hitcher. All right, so let's talk about the special features here for a few. Now, most of the special features, it's mostly just interviews. In fact, I will even say my one complaint, probably the only complaint I have about this release, and it's not really even that big of a complaint, but they don't have like a retrospective like documentary, really. It's all just standalone interviews. Now, I checked out some of these interviews, or at least kind of skimmed through them, and they were good. They were really interesting. You do have a great interview with the director here, that Robert Harmon, that I think is like 40 minutes, about 40 minutes long, and that's fairly substantive and definitely worth watching. You also have a great interview with C. Thomas Howell, and these are new interviews, right? This is like now, seeing them now. These aren't like old archival interviews. And so yeah, about a 30-minute interview with C. Thomas Howell that was really interesting. In fact, I found his interview to be particularly fascinating. Again, I didn't know he was only 17 years old when he made the film, so that's just crazy. But you definitely, you learn some interesting things hearing his perspective on this film and what it was like making the film at the time. There's also a great like podcast interview with both Rutger Hauer and the director, which is really more like a commentary track. They're essentially playing the film, and it's the two of them talking about different aspects of the film while it's kind of playing on the screen. So it's basically like a glorified commentary track, but you get Rutger's perspective in there, and that I think is where that particular podcast is pretty valuable. There's some other interviews as well, which I really haven't had a chance to check out yet. I kind of was just skimming through just to see what we got there. I would have liked to have seen like a nice feature-length making of documentary or something like that, or some sort of retrospective documentary. And while the way Second Sight does present their interviews is actually pretty good. I mean, they're well produced. They're not just showing you a guy talking. They play clips from the film while the interviews are going on. So you definitely see there's some visual stuff happening there while you're watching these interviews, but still not quite what I'd like to see in terms of like a documentary, right? I always prefer to, when they take all these different interview clips and put them all together and make a nice little presentation, I'd rather see them do something like that than just give us a bunch of standalone interviews. But if you like standalone interviews, there is a lot on here to dig into. So, and the ones I did watch were really pretty interesting. Like I said, that C. Thomas Howell interview was probably the best part of the deal, the best special feature on here. So there are a lot of special features, but it's mostly just interviews. No feature-length documentary, or no documentary really of any kind. But you do learn a lot about the film from those interviews, so I'm glad that they included those. Okay, so let's get into the packaging next. I'm sure you guys want to see this thing in a little bit more detail here. Now, first off, it comes with a cool like slip cover here. I'll show you here. See how that's designed, that the whole box kind of fits in it like that, right? And which I actually appreciate. I like the way it's kind of designed, so it makes it something that you can keep with your box if you prefer. Normally what I do with like these J cards for these box sets is I usually like fold them up and put them inside the set somewhere, but I'm not going to do that with something like that. Yeah, just an amazing looking set. Let's get show you that. This thing is thick, and it is fucking heavy too. It's really actually quite heavy. You get a lot of cool stuff in here. I'm going to kind of take everything out here so I can show you what we got here. So there's our nice chunky box. Of course, I'm a big fan of the chunky box, right? That's my favorite type of packaging for physical media. You do get some art cards here, which I actually haven't taken out yet, but I think I'm going to do that right now. Normally I don't do that, but I thought I'd go ahead and take a look at these, what we got here. Yeah, so you got basically some art cards there. C. Thomas Howell action. I'll show those to you real quick, which is something I almost never do. I usually leave the cards with that little band around them. I like that one. That one's pretty cool. That's pretty awesome too. Jennifer Jason Leigh there. And then C. Thomas there. So you do get some art cards there. Now, I'll be honest here. Art cards, I don't usually care that much about art cards. I'm glad they include them, but it's not really... they're not really that essential of a component for me. You also get the screenplay. You get a photocopy of the screenplay. And that is just like, look at that. How cool is that? And it's a fairly, it's a good amount there, but you get the whole screenplay, and they took a photocopy of it and shrunk it down into this nice little book. So I very much appreciate that. But they also have a really thick hardbound book right here that's like 200 pages long, and I'm not even going to crack it open yet, but well, I guess I could crack it open a little bit here. Let's see what we got here. But yeah, there's tons of essays and all kinds of stuff in this book, so that's pretty cool. I may actually read this at some point because just to kind of learn more about the movie and get my intellectual juices flowing a little bit there. And then, of course, you have the discs, which come in this little digipack here. Now, some people don't like digipacks. I don't have a problem with them. I think they're fine. As long as there's an actual plastic tray for the disc to sit in, then I don't have a problem with digipacks. But we can see here. So I'm going to open this up there. You get one 4K disc and one Blu-ray disc. Region-free on the Blu-ray. I can't remember. I think the special features might be on both discs. But I can't remember, and I didn't think to check before I shot this video. So yeah, this is just a stacked release, right? Second Sight did it right. They really went all in on this one and really are serving collectors well with this limited edition box set. Now, I don't know if you can still get this anymore. In fact, it might be sold out most everywhere, but there might be some more coming in at some point. What I would recommend, if you're in the US, keep an eye out at Diabolic DVD or Orbit DVD. They may actually have some copies or have some more copies coming in at some point, but I know this was a really popular one. A lot of people snatched this one up real quick when it went on sale, because Second Sight, their stuff is really sought after among collectors, you know, and they tend to, these are limited editions, so they eventually do sell out, and then you just can't get them anymore unless you like go to the secondary market on eBay or something and pay an arm and a leg for it. But yeah, just a great release. So let's move on to my Fuzz score. I'm actually going to give this a solid 9 out of 10, which is pretty high. I mean, that's, you know, usually my scores don't go a whole lot higher than that. You know, you're not going to usually see me give anything a perfect 10 on my scale. It would have to be something really special that includes everything in the set that I want in a release. You know, not just the packaging, but with the special features and, of course, the restoration. This almost gets there. And in this case, the only thing I'm really docking this one for is not having a really good like making of documentary or retrospective documentary. If they had included like a feature-length documentary of some kind, then I'd probably give this, I don't know, probably like a 9.5. So I docked it like half a point just for the lack of documentary. But this really is a fantastic release. If you are a fan of this film and can get your hands on this, I would highly recommend it. Otherwise, there is going to be a standard edition out from Second Sight as well. So if you don't want to get this big chunky box set with all the fancy packaging and books and all that, if you just want the film on disc, I believe there is a standard edition 4K that you can get from Second Sight as well. That'll have the bonus features and the discs. You just don't get all this fancy packaging. So yeah, The Hitcher, just an absolutely amazing release from Second Sight, and one that I would highly recommend. Okay, let's move on to our next film here. Let's talk about Maxxxine for a little bit here. This is a Ty West film, the third installment in a horror trilogy that began with X in 2022, and then they did a prequel, Pearl, in 2022 as well. And now we have the sequel to X, so we get to see what happened with Maxxxine after the events of X. And I just really enjoyed this one. I was really looking forward to this one. The funny thing about this is when I first saw X, I wasn't that blown away with it. I mean, I liked the film when I first saw it, but I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. I guess I was expecting more of a twist to it than I felt like we ultimately got. But then upon rewatching X, I ended up liking it much more the second time around, and I was very anxious to see Maxxxine. I wanted to see what happened next after the events of that film. And then Pearl came along, and you know, I like Pearl, but I'm not a big fan of prequels in general, so I wasn't as into Pearl as I was X even. And although, like I said, I did like it. I enjoyed Pearl, but it's you know, I'm not into period films as much, and also not being into prequels all that much. It was just okay for me. And I was definitely much more excited about Maxxxine. And one thing I love about this is the fact that it was set in the 80s, which is my era, right? I was a child of the 80s, or I came of age during the 80s. So anytime there's a film that's kind of a throwback to the 80s, or has that kind of retro 80s vibe to it, I'm usually going to be very interested in those types of films. I mean, I absolutely love throwback movies, especially when they're set in the 80s. So I knew going into this one that I was probably going to like this one the most out of the entire trilogy. And that's exactly what happened. That turned out to be the case. This is my favorite out of the three films that Ti West has done in this trilogy. I thought this was just a blast. I had a lot of fun with this. Mia Goth is an amazing actress. Now, I haven't seen her in anything but this trilogy, but I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what she does next, see what other films she does, because she's got some serious talent. She is just a stellar actress, and her performances in all three of the films in the Ti West trilogy was just very, very good. Definitely caught my attention and made me want to see more of her work moving forward. So yeah, Maxxxine has this very cool like 80s style, and it's not just that the film was set in the 80s. Ti West actually tried to make this look like a movie that was actually made in the 80s, right? Despite the fact that it was shot using digital cameras. Yeah, he tried to go for that whole aesthetic from like an 80s film, right? Right down to the font, like the font, the opening credits at the beginning of the film. You know, nice, colorful, bold font that looks like something straight out of like Footloose or something, right? Stylistically, you could tell he was doing a lot of callbacks to the 80s, and I was totally here for it. I just think Ti West is a very interesting and competent director who does some really fascinating stuff with the camera, with the lighting, with the shot compositions in his films. In fact, in this, he even used like a Brian De Palma style split screen effect in a few spots. He actually had these like these transitions between scenes that were like cut up into, I think it was 2 or 3 sections of the you know, the frame was like split up into 2 or 3 different images, and it looked like something straight out of an 80s music video. And you can tell that was totally by design, that he was going for like an 80s music video type theme there with these transitions. And just everything about the film had the aesthetic of an 80s film. And I just loved it. It was awesome. So Ti West just absolutely nailed the 80s as I see it in terms of the overall vibe and style of the film. And you've got a great cast in this film as well. Not just Mia Goth, who is always amazing in these movies, but also they threw in some heavier weights, like Kevin Bacon was in this. I love Kevin Bacon, and anytime he pops up in a movie like this, I'm always appreciative of that. But so Kevin Bacon, Giancarlo Esposito is also in this. He was great in this as well. So yeah, the really good supporting cast, and it just all worked for me. Now, one thing I will say about this, just a quick warning to collectors out there, this actually came in one of these crappy eco cases, which, you know, I've talked about before. I can't stand these things. These are garbage cases, right? So I always end up replacing those immediately, right? I keep a bunch of extra like good cases on hand to replace them when I get those. So just a heads up to you guys out there. Now, I've talked about how much I hate those eco cases in the past. In fact, I even did a little video on it earlier in the year, or was it the end of last year? But if you want to check that video out, I will put a link to it in the description for you guys. But yeah, I went on a total rant just ripping on these crappy eco cases. So feel free to check out that video if you find that to be something that you're interested in. All right, let's get into the image presentation and audio here a little bit. This was shot on digital. I believe it was shot in both 4K and 6K. I don't know if they used a couple different cameras there, but yeah, it was totally digital, not shot on film. They do have Dolby Vision and HDR10 here, and it's got an aspect ratio of 2.39 to 1. And this was pressed on a triple layer BD100 disc, which I usually appreciate. I would rather have a better encode on a higher capacity disc personally. And it does include a Blu-ray disc as well. And then for audio, you've got a Dolby Atmos track here. I thought this was a great looking film in 4K. I didn't really have any complaints about the image at all. It was a nice looking image, but I will be the first to admit that personally, I don't get as excited or I'm not as impressed by newer movies that were shot digitally, even if they're shot in 4K or 6K. When we get a 4K release, I'm usually not as impressed with newer movies that were shot digitally as I am with older catalog films that have been newly restored in 4K, sourced from a 4K scan of the original camera negative and whatnot. I tend to find myself drawn more to the older catalog films. When it comes to 4K restorations, those are the types of films that usually really get me excited. I just don't get as excited about 4K releases of movies that are shot digitally. I much prefer that cinematic look of a movie that was shot on film. So just keep that in mind. That's my personal preference. But that said, this film looks fantastic on 4K, and I love what Ty West did with it stylistically, right? It certainly doesn't look bad on 4K at all. You've got lots of great detail here, and you've got that typical depth and presence that you would expect from a 4K release. Lots of depth, lots of presence, lots of pop to the image, and yeah, lots of great detail in, you can see a lot of detail in people's faces and their hairs and their clothing, in cars or in certain locations. Yeah, there's some great stuff in this, and it really does look great on 4K. But like I said, I just feel like you get more of a wow factor with an old school film on 4K than you do with a more contemporary film that was shot with a digital camera. But the film still definitely has that 4K pop, and the colors look amazing. They look nice and vivid and bold. So yeah, it's definitely a good looking 4K. I just tend to prefer older movies on 4K more than newer movies. But I don't really have any complaints about this at all. I think it's a solid looking release. Okay, so let's talk about the special features real quick here. There's not a ton here in terms of special features. There are a few little featurettes here. There are actually like 3 featurettes that cover various aspects of the film. And they're interesting, but they're kind of short, right? They average around 10 minutes each in length, give or take a minute or two. So you get close to about a half an hour. Like if you put them all together and watch them all together, that's probably close to like a half an hour of like a making of type documentary stuff. But they're real short, but they're really interesting. You do learn a little bit more about the film and get a little bit more insight into the background of the film and the behind the scenes, what was going on behind the scenes. So I do appreciate that they included these features in this release. Moving on to the packaging, we get a slipcover, right? It's pretty straightforward here. Very basic slipcover, but it's nice looking. It's nice. It's glossy there, as you can kind of see. So, pretty straightforward stuff. Nothing too crazy on the slipcover here, but I always appreciate having the slipcover, which is why I pre-ordered it and make sure I had it on day one, because I did want the slipcover. So, but nothing crazy here in terms of collectible packaging. Just a basic kind of glossy slipcover here. So for my Fuzz score, I'm going to go ahead and give this one a 6.5. I think it's a solid movie. I thought the 4K looked solid. And, it's not the kind of 4K release that I can give like super high marks to, but anything usually over a 6 for me is fairly decent, right? 7 and above on my Fuzz scores, usually that's a really good release. Anything over a 7. 6.5, that's pretty close to that. But it's not based on how much I enjoyed the film, because I did very much enjoy this film. It's more based on the restoration, the fact that it's a 4K based on a digital camera source, right? Not an old school like film source. So that certainly factored into my score. But don't get me wrong, it's not a bad looking 4K. It is a good looking 4K. It's just not as impressive as, say, like, Jaws or something like that. A 4K restoration of Jaws or something like that. It's going to be have much more of a wow factor than something like this. But yeah, 6.5, that sounds about right for this. There wasn't a ton of special features. The packaging is fairly minimal. So yeah, I think a 6.5 sounds about right for this 4K release. Okay, next up, let's talk about The Ring for a few here. This is a movie that I really enjoyed revisiting. I hadn't seen this movie in about 20 years. I only saw the movie once, and it was probably about 20 years ago. And I remembered liking it at the time. I remembered thinking it was a pretty decent movie. So when I heard this was coming to 4K, I knew I wanted to get it. I knew this was one that I would want to add to my collection, just based on that one experience I had, 20 years ago watching it. This is a great little 4K, and I was really happy to see that Paramount did a standalone release. We did get a Ring box set from Scream Factory earlier this year, which I think had like 3 films in it, but I never pulled the trigger on that because I was really only interested in the first film. I didn't really care about the other films in that box set, so I decided to hold off and wait and see if we got some kind of standalone release. And Paramount delivered, and I'm really glad that they did that because I really didn't want to break down and pay for that kind of a box set from Scream Factory. Pay Scream Factory prices for a set that only had one film I really cared about in it, right? So yeah, I was really glad that Paramount did this standalone release, and I definitely pre-ordered it. It was a day one purchase for me, but it's a great little horror gem starring Naomi Watts. The basic premise is there's a videotape that if you watch this videotape, you will die 7 days later. And I'll just leave it at that. If you've never seen this movie, it's one you should definitely check out. But I always found the premise to be fairly intriguing. I didn't, beyond that premise, I didn't really remember that much about this film. I remembered really liking it, when I watched it 20 years ago, but I couldn't remember everything that happened in the film when I was revisiting this. So it was, in some ways, it was kind of like watching it for the first time, even though there were some things I remembered about it. But yeah, I was kind of like viewing it with new eyes. And it was just a blast to revisit this one. It was thoroughly entertaining. I really enjoyed coming back to this one after so many years. Okay, so let's get into the image quality, the image presentation, and audio here. Apparently this was sourced from a new 4K master, but I haven't found much info about this yet. I assume this was struck from a 4K scan of the original 35mm camera negative. I'm assuming it's a new scan, but I'm not totally sure about that. Now, I never had any previous editions of this on like Blu-ray or anything. Like I said, I hadn't seen it for 20 years. So this is my first time seeing it. Since then, I can't really compare it to previous Blu-ray releases. But they do include Dolby Vision on this, and the aspect ratio is a nice screen-filling 1.85 to 1. The only potential drawback here is that this 4K release was pressed on a dual-layer BD66 disc. Now, that's not in itself a big deal, but the Scream Factory release that came out earlier this year, that version was actually pressed on a triple layer BD100 disc, which is something that Scream Factory does quite often. They did that with the John Carpenter films as well, right? All the European like Studio Canal releases of the John Carpenter films were on BD66 discs, but Scream Factory seems to use BD100 discs quite often. And the reason I like this is because you're going to get a better quality encode usually on a higher capacity disc, right? So that may be one of the only drawbacks about this release. If you're like on the fence between going with the Scream Factory release, the box set from Scream Factory versus this, you might get a little bit higher quality encode on the Scream Factory release. But that said, I don't really have that many complaints about this, to be honest. Real quick, the audio is a 5.1 DTS HD master audio, but overall, what can I say about this? I thought it looked really good in 4K. I wouldn't necessarily consider this like a reference disc or a demo worthy disc. I wouldn't call it that kind of 4K release, but I did think it looked really good. Now, as I mentioned, I never saw a previous Blu-ray release of this, so I don't really have a whole lot to compare it to. but I thought that that it looked pretty good for what it was. You know, it had all the usual kind of depth and presence that you would expect from a 4K release, as I often say. But that's the best way to really describe it, right? 4K does tend to do that. Whenever you're watching something that's on 4K, there does seem to be more depth to the image. You feel like there's just more oomph to it. You know what I mean? So I say that a lot, but it's true, right? This one looked great. You got some great detail in here. The colors look amazing, even though, you know, there's definitely a very specific like color scheme going on here, you know, lots of greens and grays and blues, right? But the colors popped, you know, outdoor and locations, whatever, looked great. Lots of great detail. So not a whole lot to say about the image on this one. I thought it was fairly serviceable. It wasn't like a mind-blowing, like demo-worthy 4K, but it looked good for what it was. For the type of film it is, I thought this looked really good. It's a solid transfer as far as I can tell. Moving on to the special features, I gotta say, the special features are pretty weak, and I'll probably dock this on my final Fuzz score because of that. They really didn't include a whole lot in the way of special features. There is this big, what appears to be a deleted scene, or a scene, you know, an extra scene that wasn't in the film, that's about 15 minutes long. And so, I mean, that's kind of an interesting little curiosity to watch, but that's really the only thing really of value on here as far as special features are concerned. There's also like an extended clip of the movie Rings, which I don't care about the movie Rings, so I didn't really care about that clip. And I think there might be a couple trailers or something in there, but that's really it. This is pretty weak on the special features. Moving on to packaging, I think it's pretty self-evident here. Just a basic slipcover, nothing too exciting. Although I will say, I do think this slipcover looks pretty nice. It's nice and glossy. It's a nice looking slip for what it is, right? So I do think it's fine. You know, I don't have a problem with that. I pre-ordered it because I wanted a slip. That's a lot of times why I will pre-order things, to secure the collectible packaging. But it's not anything too fancy to write home about as far as collectible packaging is concerned. Just a basic slipcover. So for my Fuzz score, this one I'm going to give it, I think, a 6 out of 10. Which that even might be a little high, but the main reason I'm giving it a 6 is because of the restoration. I think the restoration looks solid. You know, it's a good looking 4K, nothing like impressive or like super demo worthy, but I do think it's a decent looking 4K, and that's the bulk of this score. That's why it looks like that. Plus maybe the slipcover looks kind of nice, but you know, the score is based on primarily the restoration. It's certainly not based on the lack of special features, right? So yeah, I think that sounds about right. A 6 out of 10 for The Ring. By the way, if you're enjoying the content on this channel, do me a favor and please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you do, don't forget to activate that notification bell as well, so you can be alerted whenever I'm posting videos that you might dig. And also don't forget to like the video as well. It really does help with the channel's visibility, the algorithm and whatnot on YouTube. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Okay, and for the last title today, a big one here, Nightmare on Elm Street. Let's talk about this one for a few. It's about time we finally got a 4K release of this film. It's long overdue. You know, I can't believe it took them so long to get around to actually releasing this on 4K. You would have thought this is something that would have been released on 4K a long time ago. I mean, we've had 4K in existence since what, 2016 now? So yeah, it's been a while. I would have expected this to have been one that was released years ago, but we're just now getting it, and I'm really glad we did. It's like I said, long overdue. You know, I really want them to release the entire catalog of Nightmare on Elm Street films on 4K. I don't necessarily want to own them all myself, but for the benefit of big, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street fans out there, I want them to have the full meal deal on 4K, right? Now, personally, you know, I'm cool with just having this and maybe Dream Warriors. If those come out on 4K, I'll probably buy Dream Warriors if we get a Dream Warriors standalone 4K. But aside from that, like, I'm not as into the franchise as a whole as other people are. You know, I really like the first film and the third film, and those are the ones I like to return to with, you know, some frequency, but the others I don't really care about that much. aside from maybe New Nightmare. New Nightmare was pretty good. And then that's one I might upgrade to 4K, but I'm not sure if I really need it on 4K. But I had just a total blast watching this on 4K, and I'll be really curious to see if we end up getting those other Nightmare on Elm Street films on 4K as well, in standalone releases, or at least in some kind of box set form. Okay, so let's get into the image presentation and audio. This is a new 4K restoration sourced from the original 35 millimeter camera negative, and the 4K transfer here is pressed on a dual layer BD66 disc. You only get HDR10 here in this one, no Dolby Vision, and the aspect ratio is 1.85 to 1. Again, that fills up most of your 16:9 screen, which I always appreciate that films that are shot in that aspect ratio. For audio, you get a DTS HD Master Audio 2.0 dual mono, which they call the original theatrical audio, but you do also get a Dolby Atmos track as well. So I appreciate that they included both for those who are big Atmos fans. Overall, I think this is a pretty fantastic looking image on 4K. I do think it's probably the best this film has ever looked on home media. There's some great detail in this film, and the colors are absolutely amazing. The colors really pop. And, you know, that typical depth that you get in a 4K release, yeah, it's definitely here. Now, it does look like there was maybe some grain management applied, or some sort of like grain reduction. But I don't think anything was really sacrificed as a result of that in terms of like detail, right? Because the details look great, you know, in terms of like facial features and skin complexion and hairs and clothing, and, you know, the fibers on the clothing, and just everything looks amazing, right? You can really see quite a bit of a detail in this transfer. Now, I will say there are a few shots that are a little softer looking. And at first I was kind of looking at those shots and I wasn't really sure what to make of them. But I assumed it was something that was probably baked into the source. And, you know, the fact that it's on 4K when you're at a higher resolution like that, I suspect that softness in those shots was already there. It was always there. But you tend to notice it more on 4K, right? Because of the higher resolution. Any shots that have a little more softness to them, that effect is going to be more pronounced on 4K, right? So I did notice that there were a few shots I was like, well, that shot doesn't look as good as I was thinking it should. But my conclusion is that that was just how the film was made, and that those shots were just kind of baked into the source. But there's a lot of great scenes in this that just look amazing. And, you know, the colors look awesome, you know, and especially all those great practical effects in this just look incredible. So, yeah, I think it's a really great looking 4K release. I wouldn't call it a reference quality disc or a demo quality disc, but I do think it is probably the best this film has ever looked on home media. It's certainly better than the old Blu-ray I have. Some people might have a little bit of an issue with the grain reduction, because the grain is really fine, and you know, it looks fairly consistent throughout the film. But it does look like there was maybe some kind of grain reduction applied, and some people who are purists about movies shot on film, they might have a bit of a problem with that. But I thought it looked great. I didn't have a problem with it. I thought it was a nice, crisp looking image, and yeah, I didn't really feel like any detail was really being sacrificed as a result of it. And you can still see the grain. So it's not like that filmic look is completely gone. You can still see grain. It's just very fine. But overall, just a really nice looking transfer. I don't really have any complaints about it. It's you know, it's pretty solid. I wouldn't consider it like a demo worthy transfer, but it's good enough to where I think it's I think if you're a Nightmare on Elm Street fan, you'll probably be pretty happy with this, unless you're, I mean, I don't know, some people might have a few issues with a few scenes or whatever, but I think it looks great. You know, and if there is any kind of like color revisionism at all in the color grading, I certainly wasn't aware of it. It wasn't anything that was enough for me to raise a fuss about or even notice, right? So yeah, I just thought it looked great on 4K. All right, so let's move on to special features here. They actually did put a couple things in here that I thought were pretty interesting and worth checking out. The main special feature that I was interested in was the making of Nightmare on Elm Street. It's called Never Sleep Again, although that's confusing to me because there appear to be like two Never Sleep Again documentaries, right? There's this one that's on here that is about an hour long. Well, not quite an hour long. It's like 50 minutes, but it's fairly, it's fairly substantive. I mean, you can actually put quite a bit into a 49 or 50 minute little making of documentary. That's enough time to really get into it quite a bit. But I know there's another like longer documentary out there that I think I started watching at one point. It's also called Never Sleep Again, Elm Street Legacy, I think. And that's like 4 hours long and goes into the entire franchise. And so that's something I probably would like to get in my collection at some point if I can find a Blu-ray of it. But the shorter Never Sleep Again, The Making of Nightmare on Elm Street, that shorter documentary is included in here, and I very much appreciate it. I didn't have time to watch the whole thing before I started recording this, but I did go through and watch some of it and kind of skim through a few bits of it just to get a feel for it. But I was glad they included that. There's also a cool little featurette here, about 21 minutes on New Line Films. And I thought that was actually worth watching as well. Kind of interesting learning about a little bit about the history of New Line Films and how they came to be. And then there's another featurette that I didn't really care about that much. It's just like a featurette on dreams, right? And I assume these are all like archival things that were on. I didn't look at my Blu-ray set that I have for the whole Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I didn't look to see if any of those were repeats on this. I assume they are. I assume these are mostly archival stuff. I don't know if there's much of anything new on here, but I appreciated what they did include. Particularly that Never Sleep Again making of documentary. As for the packaging, of the slip covers that we've looked at today, this was my favorite of the bunch. Not talking about the Hitcher slip case box set. That's a whole different animal, right? But the other two films I talked about had slip covers, as does this. And I do think this slip cover looks a little cooler. It's got kind of a, let's see if I can show it to you. It's hard to show you. Can you see the metallic there on the text on the Nightmare on Elm Street? It's kind of metallic, and his blades there, and his glove, kind of metallic, kind of a foil look. So I appreciate it when they do things like that with slip covers. This is an SDS release, Studio Distribution Services. But yeah, I was actually pretty happy with this slip cover. And I know it's just a slip cover. It's just a piece of cardboard. But, I'm a collector like so many of you are. And I appreciate collectible packaging like this, even if it's just something as simple as a slip. And I'll show you the front. I don't know if I showed you the back. So that there. So yeah, pretty straightforward, but a relatively nice slip cover for this release. And I believe there's also a more like limited edition box set release of this, a deluxe edition out there, which may even have an extra disc as well. This, by the way, only includes the 4K disc, does not include a Blu-ray disc. You get the 4K disc and everything is on the 4K disc. And then you get a digital code, but no Blu-ray here. And that's a common thing I've been noticing. Some 4K releases, we're starting to see that, where it's just the 4K disc. It doesn't include both a 4K and a Blu-ray. All right, so for my Fuzz score, I'm going to give this a solid 7 out of 10. Now, that's a good score for me. So if that seems low to Nightmare on Elm Street fans out there, it's really not, at least not in my mind. Anything a 7 or higher on my scale usually is a pretty solid 4K release, a good 4K release. And I would consider this a good 4K release. I really don't have any complaints about it at all. I was happy that they included a couple little featurettes there in the special features, and the restoration looks great. And yeah, I'm really glad that I was able to add this to my collection. So yeah, I think 7 out of 10 sounds about right for A Nightmare on Elm Street. Okay, so that about wraps it up for my latest edition of 4K Takeaways. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know which of these titles you're interested in. Have you picked up any of these releases yourself? And if so, do you agree with my assessment, or what did you think of them? I always enjoy hearing from you guys and chatting with you guys in the comments. Sometimes it might take me a day or two to respond to certain comments if I'm really busy with stuff. So just bear with me if that happens to be the case. Of course, if you're a Fuzz Club member, then you get automatic priority on the comments, right? I try to respond to those as quickly as possible. And yeah, I always look for Fuzz Club member comments first whenever I'm getting back to my computer to take a look at where things are at. But yeah, I always prioritize and make sure that I get to Fuzz Club member comments first. That's just one of the perks of being a Fuzz Club member. So anyway, I would love to hear from you guys. Make sure you drop me some feedback in the comments section below. Also, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Thank you so much for watching today, guys. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you soon.